Hello, everyone. Greg Diamond here, editor of 10 Stock Trader. And this is another edition of Diamond's Edge. And I'm going to look at a few things this week. We're going to look at the S&P 500, specifically looking at price and time, and at least on a short-term level. And then I'm going to look at some of the divergence between what's happening in the S&P and then looking at two sectors like transports and small caps, which are just really not doing much of anything. And that may contribute, likely will contribute to some volatility as we head into the end of the summer and beginning of the fall. All right. So here's the S&P 500, and I have a simple count here, an Elliott wave count. And essentially what I'm looking for here. So I have this label as a 1, 2, and then this appears to be a big third wave. I had mentioned before, June 20th to June 25th as an inflection point. And, I often get a question, well, why don't you short or, get aggressive on the long? Guys, it doesn't necessarily mean every single time inflection point is going to be some massive crash or boom. In the case of a very strong bull market like we're in right now, it could simply just mean a pause. And that's what we saw right here. Okay. You can see it made a high on June 20th, and then it corrected back down, and then it started rallying again. All right, so the next set of time factors that I'm looking at are the end of this week, July 12th, and then into next week, July 19th. Interesting about the 12th is inflation data. CPI comes out on the 11th, PPI comes out on the 12th, and then if you fast forward, 2 weeks into the end of the month is the Federal Reserve. A lot of people are saying that they're going to, announce a cut. We'll see. But again, I don't speculate on what the Fed will do. I look at price and time and say, all right, what is the likelihood? What is the probability of what's going to happen here between a high or a low? And then I factor in the Elliott wave counts, and I'm doing that here. So if this count is correct, you can see that I have this wave 3 here. Does the S&P 500 really push up into this week and then look to start to correct at the end of this third wave? Perhaps with a fourth wave into, the end of the month in and around the Federal Reserve, regardless of what they do. All right. So that's something that I'm looking at in terms of price and time in the short term. All right. Now let me show you what's happening in small caps. And I wish there was more to talk about here. You would think that with S&P, NASDAQ, semiconductors, obviously, that, small caps would be doing pretty good as well, but it's just not the case. All right. Yes, it rallied from the low last year, but from December of 2023, it made a brief new high, but it hasn't really broken out with the other indexes. As you can see here, or other sectors rather, it's just gone sideways for the most part. It's been in this consolidation range. All right. Well, how does that factor into the other time inflection points? Well, we just have to see, but this is not something that I want to get crazy aggressive with, because we just haven't seen this break out. I was looking for this to be, and I can label this, this was part of a Diamond's Edge video not too long ago, and I was looking at this as a 1, 2, and then a potential third wave breakout, to follow along with the S&P and the NASDAQ and semiconductors, but it just hasn't happened. All right. So the more time that passes that it's not following through with what's happening in the other sectors, the more it tells me that, this is probably a warning sign for caution, heading into the end of the summer. All right. So this is another just lagging index or lagging sector, and that's a Dow Jones Transportation. Very similar to what we see in the small caps. Yes, it rallied with everything late last year. And then, similar to what we saw in the small caps, it just hasn't really done much. Okay. We saw FedEx have a nice jump higher after earnings. We had a nice trade in that with 10 stock traders. We had call options on, and that was a nice trade. And FedEx has done relatively well. It's not a semiconductor stock, but it's been volatile, as you can see. But it had this huge jump. But when I see the sector not following along, it's just not a good sign. Okay. And then there's the old Dow theory. If here's a Dow Jones Industrial Average. Okay, so if the Dow and the transports are not confirming one another, you can kind of see what I have in the Dow here. Maybe this, you can see again, this 20th to 25th, it kind of marked the pause here. Not the craziest or not the best price action happening in Dow, again, it's starting to lag semiconductors, even the S&P 500. So when we factor in the Dow and the transports and the small caps, you know, that I'm not saying that you go out and short everything right now, but it's sending a warning sign that momentum underneath, you know, the stronger stuff like semiconductors, is sending a warning that, you know, maybe you don't get as aggressive here. So that's what I'm looking at over the next, call it, you know, 2 to 3 weeks. I'll obviously have more next week to see how this July 12th to July 19th time factor plays out. Again, it could just be an inflection point, but that's kind of what I'm looking at in the short term. All right, thank you very much. I'll see you next week.